Hi, everybody. Happy New Year. Welcome back. I'm so glad that you've come to watch today. I'm sorry I can't be with you live, but I am playing in somebody else's sandbox today. I am doing a colored pencil Zoom class with the amazing Cynthia Knox. We're doing a fabulous pet portrait. So I decided to pamper myself a little bit. I'm going to take a day and play with colored pencils, but I couldn't leave you with nothing to do this Saturday. So I came up with this fun little piece. We're going to do Sunflower Country. This is the one with the butterfly. It has a few interesting techniques, an elaboration on a technique that I use quite often, and a fun sunflower, some really cool lettering, and a pretty butterfly. So if you guys are ready to get started on Sunflower Country, so am I. So this is the piece we're going to paint today, right from scratch. We're going to finish this one completely from start to finish. As you know, I love anything to do with sunflowers. It's one of my favorite flowers. And I love bugs of all sorts, with the exception of spiders. I don't do spiders. But butterflies, beetles, all sorts of little odd creepy crawlers I really admire and like. And butterflies, bumblebees in particular. So this one has a beautiful butterfly. Some fun lettering. I'm going to show you a really easy technique for doing the lettering. And this nifty background. This is a multicolor wood grain, or like a wood look, I guess, or a distressed barn board look, using a variety of colors. So we're doing a multicolored background, and then the fun lettering. I'm going to show you how to do a drop shadow, both on the butterfly, the sunflower, and on some of this lettering. I think you're going to enjoy that. And then we're going to do a little bit of work with Posca pens, and we're going to use a gel pen. So we've got lots of fun little techniques in this piece. There are two of them. There's one with a bumblebee as well, called Sunflower Country with Bee, that I really like, of course, because I like bees. So they make a great pair, and they're quite pretty. It uses the same techniques, so it's an easy one to do. And the bumblebees are not hard to paint either. So we're going to be doing this one, Sunflower Country with the butterfly. And I love the background on this one. I do that that faux barn board look quite frequently because I really like it. So I start with a black background. This is just one coat of lamp black. You're going to need a fugly brush for this one, which is the Dynasty Encaustic Oval. This is why I call it a fugly brush, because right around the time they're absolutely perfect to use. They're pretty fugly. And this one is no exception. And I have a handful of these, but this is my favorite because it's just so beat up and it really lives up to its name. And the first color we're going to use is this one. This is Bahama Blue. I know this seems like an odd thing to do a wood grain with, but I think you're really going to like this one. Bahama Blue, one of my favorite colors. And we're going to use a little bit of Jo Sonja's Fast Dry Glaze. I keep my little bottle handy. Just to thin the paint out a little bit. If you don't have the fast dry, you can do it with water. So we're going to pick up some of that Bahama Blue, and we're going to do a horizontal application, and it's going to be pretty sloppy. It's going to let some of the black peek through. Neatness doesn't count for this. Perfection is definitely to be avoided. We want this background a little rustic looking. We want some blue. We want some of that black showing through. So don't worry if it looks kind of streaky and unfinished. That's all right. We want that barn board look. So it's going to take on this really heavily distressed look. There. So that's your first coat with that Bahama Blue. So we're going to dry that really quick. I love this finish. It's so versatile. If you use blues or soft grays, it just takes on a really nice warm look. Anytime you work over black, that's just your base. That's what's going to give you all of that visual texture. And then layering a variety of colors over top of it just creates an even more interesting background. I am all about the layers. I love seeing more and more layers. The more layers you have, the more depth you have. And we're going to be doing some really fun projects coming up in the new year using a variety of techniques for these backgrounds. And And I'm really completely obsessed with home decor pieces at the moment, so bear with me. I've got a couple pieces on my drawing table right now that I'm really excited about. Expanding some of the techniques that we use, so we're going to have a little bit of fun with some various mediums. And that is almost dry. Just a couple more spots to take care of. I'm going to clean out my brush because our next color is going to be warm white. So throw a little warm white on the palette. Now the warm white you cannot see because I have moved the camera too far. There we go. So I've got some warm white on my palette right here. We're going to use that to put the next layer on. And it's going to give us some really interesting textures. So make sure this brush is cleaned out. And again, we're going to pick up a little bit of the Jo Sonja. Just a little. You don't need to have the brush dripping wet. That might be too much. Here we go. Okay. Nope, got blue in my brush yet. Let's get a clean one, shall we? There we go. So I've got, look at this. This is not a fugly brush. Not yet anyway, but it will be. So I've got a little bit of warm white in my brush. And we're going to do the same thing we did the first time around. We're going to lay in some white, but we're really going to let it skip. You don't want to cover this completely. So there's actually less paint in the brush than the first time around. And we're going to let some of the blue peek through. Just like that. We're not looking to cover the blue completely or the black. We want some of that black peeking through. I love this look. It's versatile. You can do so many things with it. Looks great for country stuff. It's also good for beachy themes. You can do some fun things with this. So I've got a little bit of white everywhere. I just want to make sure I get a little more. There we go. So I've still got a fair amount of blue peeking through. It's very irregular, very uneven. Got lots of the black still peeking through everything, which is what we want. And we're going to dry this. Now, the surface that I'm working on for this is an 8x8 art panel. You can get these at Michael's. And they work really nicely for this. When you put your base coat on, just that first coat of black, give it a light sanding afterwards. You don't have to sand it right down, just a light sanding just to make it nice and smooth. It will make painting so much easier. So just make sure this is dry before we move on to that next step. I love the look of this. I just think it's so pretty. So I'm going to give myself a clean palette. And the next color we're going to work with is this one. This is Asphaltum. One of the colors that I probably use the most is Asphaltum. Now, the brushes that I'm using today are Dynasty Water Lily. I'm using these two. These are the two sizes of angles that I use the most. I use a 1/2 inch and a 3/8. These are the ones that I use the most often. And I really like these Water Lily. They hold a ton of liquid, just like the Faux Squirrel. They hold a ton of liquid. These are just a little bit softer than my Faux Squirrel. And they work beautifully. So give them a good soak in some water before use. I usually let my brushes sit for about 5 minutes to make sure that the bristle is nice and wet and that they've had a chance to really drink up the liquid. And it also makes a difference in how your brush functions. So I'm not really happy with that particular angle, so I'm going to get it out. So we're going to put a shadow around the outside edges. We're going to essentially antique the edges of this. And so I'm going to use a little bit of Jo Sonja in my brush. And I'm going to blend it out. I don't want it full strength. We don't want like a hard, dark line all around the outside edge. We just want something a little softer. So I blend it out really well. And then I'm going to put that float all along the edge, all the way around. And it's going to give us that aged look, a little distressed at the edges, a little worn at the edges. I really like having that little bit of age at the edges of things. It just makes things nice and warm, especially things with a country theme or a farmhouse theme. I like that little bit of age at the edges. Just makes things look a little bit worn, but not terribly heavily distressed. And it does not have to be a perfect float. It just needs to add color to that edge. Voila. Now, I do this in layers. As I said before, I like doing things in layers, layers, layers. The more layers, the more depth. So once you've got that shadow on, you're going to dry it, then you're going to repeat it and go back around. And that's where I like to deepen my corners. I make them a little darker in the corners. You can gradually build it up. And that gives you so much more control over it. If you, instead of trying to get it all done in one float, doing it in small controlled floats with thinned color will make a world of difference. So I want to deepen my corners a little bit, which means I want to walk this color out so that I get a nice, see how it rounds out nicely? I like to see that on all of my corners. Just walk it out a little bit. See how it gives you just a nice edge, a little deeper in the corner. Working with thinned color gives you a lot of control over it. Instead of trying to build up and, get those colors really heavy in one shot, doing it in thin overlapping layers gives you much more control. And then you can stop when you're happy, as opposed to realizing you've got too much on and then have to try and get it off. So, I like my corners deeper. So usually I will end up going around 2 or 3 times just to get what I want. And if you've watched this channel often enough, or if you join us every Saturday for the lives, you know how often I do this. Almost every piece that I paint, I use some variation of this because I really like this aged appearance. And it works for so many things. Some of the really elegant designs, it works very well on. But the same technique, regardless, works well on across the board. You can do so many things with it. Okay, so I think I'm happy with this. So a couple of spots I want to deepen just to make it a little more interesting. Now, once you've got this part done, it's going to look a little chunky. It's very bright in the middle, and then it's, kind of looks dirty at the outside. So you're going to take your fugly brush and some heavily thinned asphaltum. And by heavily thinned, I mean heavily. So it's almost watered out. So I'm going to take a little bit of my Jo Sonja and heavily thinned, meaning it's mostly medium or water, and a little bit of asphaltum. And we're going to brush heavily thinned over everything. And if it's too dark, you can just brush some of it off. So by putting this thinned layer on, it brings everything into the same tone, and that hard-edged look disappears. Just gives you more control. I'm going to rinse that out again. Got a spot here I'm not thrilled with, but we can fix it. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to dry this, and then I'm going to show you a fun little edge. And this is super easy to do, but I like doing it first because we've already done the bulk of the shading for this background. There is a little more to do, but after we get the lettering on. So I want to make sure that this is completely dry because we're going to transfer the line drawing on shortly, and it's so much easier when the paint is completely dry. But I love this soft, muted look of this multicolor. And it's going to show off the oranges and the yellows that are in this piece. With that little bit of blue, it's complementary to that yellow, and so it works very nicely. So almost there. This will just take a second. There we go. So we're going to put a nice little edge on this. So I'm going to use a little bit of lamp black. I love how this looks. So a little bit of lamp black, and I'm using a number 2 rigger. You can use a round brush. I prefer to use the rigger. I just find it gives me a little bit more control. And a little Jo Sonja just to thin the paint out a little bit. And you want your brush fairly loaded up. You want a fair amount of paint. See that? Fair amount of paint on that brush. And you're going to literally push and pull the brush along the edge. Push, roll it along. So you are going to end up with what looks like chips at the edge of the paint. Now, you can make them really heavy and big if you want to. I prefer them a little smaller, and I pay attention to where these streaks are. So when you get to one of these, this is where you can push and pull, and you can get some bigger things like that. It all works in your favor. Now just move the brush along until I get little chips everywhere. Just like that. Now you can make it as wide as you like, whatever you're comfortable with. I prefer something with a little narrower. I don't want it to look too heavy, but I really do like this sort of worn and chipped look at the edges. And when it's narrow and the chips are small, it's a little bit more effective. There we go. And it's super easy to do it this way. And I like doing it after I've done the shading. It just seems to give the wood a little more realism. So as I said, you can move it along. Big chips, small chips, long thin lines, little rough edges here and there. It doesn't have to be consistent. In fact, it looks better if it's not. So just little irregular, random broken bits at the edge. The first time I saw this, the designer Chris Hoy was using it, and I thought, oh, I love that look. It was just so clever. So she showed me how to do it. And I just thought it was a brilliant way to finish the edges on something and to really make things stand out. So I've used it quite a bit since then. I take no credit for it because Chris was the first one to do it, and I love Chris's work. She does some of the most amazing things. So credit where credit is due. But I do love this look. I just think it finishes the edges of things so beautifully. So there we go. We've got that nice little chipped wood look all the way around. And we're going to dry this. I like this highlighted, and you can do this with either, it looks great as is. I really like it highlighted, and I like to do it either with a liner brush or with a gel pen. I like using my white gel pen, or a Posca pen, if you've got a nice fine one, will work just beautifully. I like my gel pen for this because it's fine enough for me. You can also use a liner, paint pen, whatever works for you. So white gel pen here somewhere. Maybe not. Oh yes, there it is. I'm having trouble keeping track of my gel pen today. There we go. So to highlight this, it's super easy. Just follow the broken edge that you just created with the gel pen. It doesn't have to be perfect. I just follow the edge of the black paint. And pay attention to where all the little wobbles and bobbles are and just highlight those. And it just gives you a really nice finished edge. And it's a fun way to finish it off. So, and you can leave this until the very end if you like. I just kind of like doing it right at the beginning. I just like how this looks. It's just a fun way to finish it. Super easy. Now, the gel pen that I'm using is a Uniball Signo Opaque White. We do have these on the website. It's a fabulous white gel pen. It's one of the ones that I have used for years. I found it works really well over acrylic paint. From time to time, it will sort of get stuck or get clogged. You just wipe the tip with a little alcohol swab or, a tiny bit of sanitizer or whatever, and it'll work just fine. Just make sure your paint is completely dry before you tackle this. Otherwise, it will clog your pen. So that paint's got to be dry. I do love these, though. It's a very opaque white ink, and it works beautifully. Now, I use gel pens an awful lot when I'm designing and when I'm painting for all sorts of things, for little details, what have you, because I really sometimes like really fine details that a brush can't really do. And I like the idea of incorporating a variety of media into artwork. So the pens that I use the most often are these Uniball Signo. This is a 1mm. The black one I use is a 0.38, so it's a really fine black gel pen. I use that mostly for details, finer details. And the other one I use is a 0.38 red gel pen, and I use that primarily for tracing my line drawings. So I can see where I've been. And the other reason that I like that one is because of that 0.38 tip, that stainless steel ball with that really fine point. It just creates a nice, even, crisp line. And it's small. It's not a heavy line, so it's very easy to either paint over or erase. I really don't like using a stylus or anything like that for tracing my line drawings because I find it makes the lines are far too heavy. So I'm going to dry this really quick. The ink itself dries very fast, but it's me and I will smear it if I'm not careful. So let's erase, make sure that this is all dry. So the next step for this is to transfer our line drawing on. And the line drawing is full size, so you don't have to enlarge it. And it's going to fit precisely inside the lines of this 8x8, comme ça. Just like that. There's going to be a couple of millimeters all the way around. That's intentional because we're going to tape this in place. Now, I use frog tape or I use 3M safe release blue tape. Those are my preferred tapes, painter's tapes to use. And I store my tape in either a small Rubbermaid container, or in the case of frog tape, I store it back in the container it comes in. And there's a reason for it. The people that develop frog tape are brilliant because they put their tape in one of these, and this is why. The edge of your tape has adhesive on it. And if it's not stored in a clean container, say it's thrown in a drawer, the edge of your tape is going to pick up glitter and dust and a whole bunch of other detritus that's laying around, and you will never get a clean line out of it. So whenever you open a new roll of tape, store it in a small Rubbermaid container, or if it's frog tape, keep these containers too. I do. And then you can store any brand of painter's tape inside one just to keep it from collecting all that debris. And then you'll always have a clean line when you're painting. So my line drawing is in place. I'm going to be using a little bit of gray graphite. I like gray for this. Shows up clearly on that background. And I'm going to use my red gel pen. And we're going to quickly trace this. I like nice fine lines when I'm tracing. The other nice thing is with this fine tip, all those little details are nice and clear. Whereas if they're heavy lines, you can't tell where they are. And I do like my line drawings to be clear. So with that red, you can see where you've been, and borders stay borders instead of becoming heavy lines. Just like so. And having that red gel pen, you can always see where you've been. And there's a variety of pens out there that you can do this with, but I've always found that this one, because of that fine point, the transfers are always cleaner for me, and I really get very annoyed when I can't see what I've traced. I look at it and I can't tell, well, did that line go here or there, because they've overlapped or run into each other, and that's frustrating. So I like this nice fine line. And the other nice thing is that you don't have to press hard to get a good transfer with this one. When it comes to tracing, a lot of people really like parchment paper, or I should say vellum, to trace with. I've never been a fan. I've always found that it stretches, and I don't need it to be transparent. So I usually take my line drawings and I photocopy them. So I leave my original either in the pattern, or in my case, I put it in the file folder that the pattern line drawings go in. And that's where my original stays. And then I make a photocopy and I use the copy paper for my image. I've always found I end up with a much more accurate transfer than if I use a tracing paper or a vellum. I just have always found this. So I prefer to work with just a copy paper. And this way, I'm working with the original line drawing. It's not a copy of a copy, a hand copy of a copy. And so everything that is supposed to be there will be there. And if you use the red gel pen, then you'll know when you've missed something, or if you've overshot the runway somewhere and I forgot to put that petal in. And I've done that, just like everybody else has. Just like I've put my graphite paper on upside down. I mean, we are only human. Some of us more human than others. So, there we are. Butterfly. This is just a super easy way to make sure you get all of those things. So I've got one leaf done. What are these petals? Whenever you're tracing, accuracy is important, especially when you're dealing with perspective, still life in particular, landscapes. The perspective is important. So if you're tracing a line drawing and it's inaccurate, it shows up in the painted piece. You have to take your time and trace accurately so that you get all of the pieces traced that you're supposed to. And that's another reason why I like this red pen, is because I can see when I have missed something. It makes it a little easier to see those things. Of course, nothing's perfect, but it works better than most. So I'm starting the new off year on a bit of a designing binge. I have been playing with my pencils, looking forward to my class with Cynthia. I have been tidying up and reorganizing some things in the studio. And of course, when you're doing that, you find things you forgot you had. And when you find things you forgot you had, you want to get them out and play with them. So, yeah, I've been on a little bit of a designing binge and having a great deal of fun with some ideas that I've been playing with. So, even though I did take a great deal of time off this holiday and just relaxed and spent more time with my family, of course, the postal strike had a lot to do with that, but it's all good. So when it comes to the lettering, you just trace the general shape on this one. This one is a handwritten style, so this one is an easy one to trace. You don't have to be overly cautious with this one. It's pretty fluid. And we're going to use a Posca pen to do this portion of the lettering. And then I've got a couple of tricks to make that really stand out nice that I'm going to show you. And we're also going to be doing a dropped shadow. Now, I've drawn in the drop shadow on this, on the lettering, on the word country. It'll make your life a little bit easier. But it does make for a really fun finish on this piece. So, trace out the lettering. And trace your shadow. You're going to erase all these graphite lines anyway, so don't worry. Now, the font that I used for this is called Playbill, Western Playbill. It's a very typical country style or Western style font, so I thought it would work well for this. It did very well. I love looking for interesting fonts to put into the designs so that they portray or communicate the theme of the piece that I'm painting. I wanted this to have a real country feel, so I really liked this font for this. Easy peasy. It's a fun font to paint. It's no different than painting anything else. This not a scripty type font, so you don't have to worry about any of those, flourishes or anything. So this one is like painting, I'll call it like painting the barn. It's just filling in that space. So you don't have to worry about a whole lot of major technique for this one. It's just another space. It's the drop shadow that makes this one interesting. So I'll show you how it's done. It's not hard, but it is very effective. It adds a lot of depth to this piece. And I carried that over onto the butterfly and onto the sunflower so that it all has that same feel to it. It keeps this piece from looking flat. Gives it a little more dimension. So much fun. I love doing these. So to any of the members of my membership group that are watching today, thank you for being with me all through 2023. You guys been amazing, or 2024, I should say. And we've got lots of fun things planned for you for 2025. And we're starting off the year doing our December project this coming Wednesday. because of the holiday. So we're doing our painted piece on Wednesday, and then at the end of January, we're doing our colored pencil study called Magnolia Process. So I'm really excited about that, and I'm already working on our February project, so I can't wait. It's going to be so much fun. So I'm going to do a quick check. Missed a spot. Of course I did. Didn't get everything. What else did I miss? Just double checking everything. That's one of the nice things about this, is that I can immediately see where I've missed something. Just double check everything. And it looks pretty good. Okay, so now fortunately there's not a ton of base coating involved in this. Well, there is, but it's not as hard as you think. So here we have our line drawing in place. And we're going to talk about that drop shadow because I like doing all of those shadows first. And there's a reason for it. Whenever you're doing any type of shading and all of the other colors are going to be fairly light, especially for a background, I like to do the shading first so that when we do the base coating for everything else, any areas that would overlap onto the design itself get covered up by the base coats. And then it gives you a crisper finish, a cleaner finish. So this is the reason that I use this method, is by shading first. So we're going to start with a little asphaltum, and I'm using a number 2 rigger for this, and a bunch of Joe Sonia's glaze. You can use water, don't panic. So a little bit of Joe Sonia's glaze. You're going to thin it out quite heavily, and all of those shadows around our lettering just get painted in with that heavily thinned asphaltum. Just like that. So it doesn't have to be perfect. So we're just using that heavily thinned asphaltum to fill in all of those shaded areas on that lettering. So you don't have to worry if it goes on to the lettering. It's all right because we're going to put a base color in there. So we do all of this first and try to keep it all one value. So if you have to mix more, try to make sure that you get it the same darkness as the first one so that it's consistent across the board. That's why I mix such a big puddle, to make sure that I have it all. Like that. And this part is fast. This works up really quickly. I just keep adding a little bit of Joe Sonia's to that puddle so that I get lots of color. And like I said, if I go over and onto my lettering, it's all right because I still have the base coat to put down. So heavily thinned, you can, as I said, you can use the Joe Sonia's for this, or you can use water. And I'm using a number 2 rigger. If you don't have a rigger, you can use a small round. Any small brush will do. You're just filling it in. So, okay. So we have, look at that. Got that nice little shadow in there. Going to take that same mixture, and we're going to add a shadow to the side of the butterfly. Just like this. And as I said before, it doesn't matter if it goes over the butterfly. And we're going to stop right there. And then we'll come in on this side of the wing, and we're going to do the same thing. And we'll stop right there. So there's our first drop shadow. And we're going to come over to this side of the wing, just short of the tip. See how it doesn't go all the way to the tip here? We're going to come just short of the tip on this side and put that drop shadow in like that. So there is our drop shadow on our butterfly. Now, I want to extend that down to the tip, And in here, in between the butterfly and that sunflower, a little bit of that thin asphaltum. And come over here to this leaf. Try to keep them all roughly the same size. So if it's, 1/4 inch wide, keep it 1/4 inch everywhere. And just like that. Fill in those little shaded areas there. I want a little bit on that sunflower. And I think we're good. So we've got a little drop shadow going all the way around our sunflower and the stem, those leaves, and our butterfly. And it's just done with a little bit of thinned asphaltum. Easy peasy. So I'm going to dry this real quick. And then we're quickly going to turn our background into some wood. So I've got a little 6-inch ruler, and I've got an Identi-Pen. You can do this with a Sharpie too. And I'm going to do it so that it goes just behind our butterfly a little bit. And I'm going to draw a line right here to the edge. And I'm going to carry that line on this side from the sunflower over, like so. So we've got a line there. And then I'm going to do that again right through the sunflower, the word sunflower. I'm going to take that line all the way across. I'm going to skip the stem. I don't want it to touch the stem. And then I'm going to carry it all the way across to the other side. I like to stop short of that white border. So now we have 3 individual planks. It's a nice little line. It's not too strong. Oops. Wrong cap. There we go. And we're going to take that 1/2-inch angled shader again. And we're going to put a shadow on either side of that plank, just like that. Just a nice little float. Don't overthink it. And do the same thing to this one. You could do this at any time or not at all. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to. If you're not keen on the planks, you don't have to do it. So I'm going to dry this. I just love how this looks. I like that heavily distressed wood look. And at the moment, it doesn't look all of that great until we get some of this filled in. So the color that we're going to use first is a little bit of lush green. And this is for our stem and our greenery. I love lush green. It's a little more opaque than antique green. It works very nicely for our purposes. I'm going to grab a small round. I've got a number 5. Seems to be the size that I gravitate the most is the number 5. And just going to quickly base coat our leaf. Again, we're just filling in color. And we're only doing 1 coat because we've got 3 other colors going over top of this. We really don't need to make it fully opaque. So there's our leaves. I love that lush green. It's such a gorgeous green. And yep, I'm painting right over top of that letter. It's just the top of the L and the top of the F. And they'll still be fairly visible. We'll be able to work around that. Here we go. So there's our leaves. I'm going to use the rigger to fill in the stem. You know that I don't base coat in the typical way. Because most of what I paint uses so many multiple colors and layers, I don't usually paint things in fully opaque because it's more work than it should be, or more work than it needs to be. So I've got my green in. I'm going to dry it because it's me and I will put my hand in it. So there's our greenery. Now, because we're working with a yellow, ordinarily I would put down a base of warm white first. However, the yellow that I'm working with today is quite opaque, so I don't really need to it. I'm using baby duck for this one. This one's a little more of a pastel yellow, quite soft. It's one of those colors that I really enjoy using. I've used it so much since it came out. It is a new color. It came out with Decorate's new color line last year. And I have used this color so much since then. So I've switched to a smaller round. I'm using a number 1. And we're going to base coat these petals with the number 1. And I try to do it in as few strokes as possible. And I paint my petals like this. I follow their shape down to their point. There we go. I think this round has seen better days. There we go. So I like to fill in each of these petals. I do the larger petals first. No particular reason. I just prefer to do it that way. It's one of my quirks, I guess. And again, I follow the shape of the surface. So if it's a petal, I follow the shape of the petal, like so. And generally, I can do these petals in 3 strokes. The other reason I like doing it this way is that if there are any brush marks remaining, then they fall into the natural direction that you would see those lines and streaks in the petals. So it works for you. You don't have to spend hours trying to get rid of those brush marks. They just fall into the surface and become part of it. Here we go. I love this baby duck. It's just such a pretty yellow. It's very sunny and soft. So next Saturday, we are live, and we have a fun project for you. We are doing lavender, sweet lavender. And it's a fun little home decor piece. If you were a fan of bees or lavender, you'll enjoy it. It's a fun one. I have a neat technique for painting lavender. Lavender is one of those flowers. It's just little clusters of flowers. And so there's a fun way to paint them, a fun and easy way to paint them. So we're going to be doing that. We're using a similar background to this. We're using a single color over top of a black base. And some bright purple lavender and a bold bumblebee. So we're going to have a little bit of fun next week. And of course, when we're live, we always have giveaways. So we have some wonderful things from Tombow and some brushes from Dynasty Brush. I'm rather excited about it. Let me show you. Dynasty has produced a new line of brushes in 2024 called Evo Art. Absolutely fabulous brush. And I know we haven't given any away yet. So we have a couple of sets of these to give away next week. So 2 fabulous sets of those, and I think we have some faux squirrel as well. So we do have some goodies to give away next week, along with some Tombow goodies. And I believe we even have some stencils. So there's lots of stuff to send out, make people happy with next week. So join us for Sweet Lavender. It's going to be a fun one. So almost done with this base coat. Now, when I do petals, I usually try to leave a small, narrow space between them, just so that I know where they are. It just makes it easier to distinguish them, but it doesn't have to be a really sharp line. I try to make it as fine as I can, so that you're not having to work too hard to fill them in. Now that little space behind the butterfly, I kind of like this because it makes the butterfly tuck into the flower as opposed to just being in behind it. So there we are. Just finish off this last couple of petals. And I'm going to use a rigger to base coat the butterfly. It's not a long one. Doesn't take very long to base coat it, but there's a lot of little spaces to paint in. So I'm going to use that number 2 rigger, and we're using that same yellow in our butterfly to paint in all of these areas, these wedges inside the butterfly. And again, I like to leave a thin, narrow space. This does not have to be perfectly base coated. Much like doing the shading, we're going to put black on last. So the black is going to hide any little sins that may be remaining or any little rough edges that may be remaining. So don't overthink it, but just leave enough space so that you can see where things are. That's all. Again, doesn't have to be perfect. And 1 coat will suffice. So 1 coat of baby duck on the wings of the butterfly. It's going to look a little chunky for a bit and a little unfinished for a bit, obviously. That's okay. Again, don't overthink this. It achieves nothing. I should probably have dried the sunflower before I started this, because I just promptly put my fingers in wet paint. Told you. I love butterflies, and I like using a variety of butterflies. Sometimes they're realistic looking, and based in reality, and sometimes they're not. That's okay. Sometimes it's just the fact that it's a butterfly. It doesn't matter if it's a real one or not. In this case, this is a swallowtail. I just adapted him to suit the color palette that I wanted. So there we go. So we have our base colors in place. I love this yellow. It's just such a pretty color. And it works so nicely. There. So we have our yellow in place. Let's dry this really well. And then we're going to base coat the center of this with a little bit of asphaltum. And we're going to use a deer foot because I want a little texture on our center. So a little bit of asphaltum. I'm going to load up that deer foot. And we're going to stip a little color in all the way around. Neatness doesn't count for this either. We're just filling it in. And again, I'm not worried about it being fully opaque because at this stage it doesn't matter. We have multiple colors going over the center of this, so it's of no real concern at this point, but we do need to get a little color in there. And there we are. Ta-da! Sunflower. There we go. So we are ready to really get into the meat and potatoes of this piece. So the brush that I'm using is a 3/8 angle. I'm going to rinse out my brushes here instead of leaving them sitting in the brush basin. And rinse out my deer foot because I'm going to need that in a little while. So we're going to start with these leaves. I love working with, I like leaves. And I always paint them with the same colors, pretty much. I make some exceptions, but not in this case. I'm using, as I said, we're using lush green for the base color. Our shading color is either plantation pine or black green. I'm partial to black green lately. I just like the depth of it. I just find it makes for a really nice shading. Plantation pine's a little more transparent, also beautiful for shading. I'm going to grab a little piece of shop towel here. I want to lay this down. There we go. It's just something to blot my brush on. So a little bit of black green and a little bit of Joe Sonia's. And we're going to shade up underneath the flower. And it's going to be a fairly loose float. Don't worry about it being perfect because we're going to do it again. There we go. So up underneath that flower, get lots of depth on that in there. We want nice rich shadow under there. There we go. I like the black green. It just makes such a nice contrast. And then we're going to use that black green on the stem as well. Nice little shadow along the right side. And don't forget to shade underneath that flower. You need a nice dark shadow under there. So that leaves this side for highlights. Our light source for this one is coming from the upper left side. So our shadows are going to fall to the right. Remember, we put them all on the right side. So dry your shading. And then we're going to shade the center veins. We want a nice deep shadow on those center veins, like so, right down to the point. And this is where you can come back in and deepen the shadows underneath. The first shadow just establishes it. This one is where you can deepen it. So now we've got a nice shadow down the center vein. And we're going to do the same thing on this side. So nice little shadow down the center vein, right from the tip. It's important to do it right from the tip, or if you're working from the flower down, make sure that the shadow goes all the way to the tip. And then we're going to deepen the shadow and walk it down a little. Doesn't have to be a lot. There we go. So now we've got nice shadows down those center veins. And I'm going to deepen the shadow underneath that and down the back side. There we go. So now we've got nice little shadows in place. Now I'm going to dry this really well. And I'm going to tone these shadows, which means I'm going to make them feel a little bit warmer and a little less harsh. And I'm going to do that with a little float of asphaltum. Again, every time I use asphaltum, it is heavily thinned. I don't need to have it full strength, but that little bit of asphaltum just warms up those shadows and it deepens the tone a little. It doesn't make them necessarily darker, but it does deepen them a little. So there's that little bit of asphaltum, and it just keeps everything nice and warm. There we go. So going to dry that. Now we're going to start adding our highlights. Now our highlight is done with Margarita, which is that high acid green, a very bright yellow green. I'm going to pick up a little bit on the tip of my brush. I'm going to blend it well so that I get a nice highlight. And I'm going to start at the outer edge. See how I've got my angle pointed back towards me? I'm going to start at the outer edge, and I'm just going to scrub back and forth to the tip of the leaf. Straight down the center vein. And then I'm going to come up the edge like that, with that back and forth. Like a little chisel blend, so it creates a little serrated edge on your leaf. So you get a highlight, but you also get a little texture at the same time. So I'm going to do the same thing on this one. Down the center vein. And then chisel. And do a little bit on the other side as well. There. So we have highlights on both leaves. And then I'm going to, ooh, goodness, forgot to blend. Picked it up, forgot to blend. Okay. I'm going to put a little float just in from the edge of that stem. Going to leave a little space. And I'm going to put a float of that Margarita down the left side of the stem. So there is the highlight on your stem. And I almost forgot our little, we've got a little decorative filler leaf over here that I completely forgot. I'm going to base coat that. Just a little bit of lush green. Little float at the end where it joins the stem, just a little U-shaped float. And then at the tip of the leaf, or the little leaflet, I guess, little tiny leaf, little highlight just at the tip of the leaf. Excellent. So we can dry this, and then we're going to start on that sunflower. Now, one of my favorite oranges in the Deckwart line is this one. It's called Warm Sunset. The reason I like this is that it's quite a fiery orange, but it's a little toned down. It's just very rich, very warm, and it's very appropriately named. Warm Sunset, because that's exactly what it reminds me of. So you're going to pick up a small amount of Warm Sunset, and we're going to float in behind all of these petals at the back. So all of those petals that are in behind that front row are going to get a float of this Warm Sunset. Just float down into that V in between them. Doesn't have to be perfect. It's just going to separate all of these petals. That's all it's doing. But we need that nice fiery orange. I love that tone. It's just so beautiful. And don't panic if it almost covers the petals. That's okay. Don't worry. We are nowhere near finished. But this does just separate all of our petals very nicely. Here we go. Ta-da! And then we're going to take that same color, blend it out well, and you're going to make a U-shaped float at the bottom of each of these forward petals, those ones at the front, just like that. So it's going to come about halfway. So come down half from the halfway mark and come up. You're going to leave a little gap. Do you see the space? That little gap right there. So you're not taking it right to the edge. You're just going to leave a little gap like so and give you that U-shaped float. That little gap is going to help you create that cupped feeling of the petals coming forward. Just like that. And it is going to look a little rough for a bit, and that's okay. Oop, I missed a petal. There we go. There we are. This just helps make that sunflower look a little bit more dimensional. If you're looking for the pattern for this, it's available on the website at tracymoreau.net. We have all three. We have the butterfly, we have the bumblebee, and we have the lavender, sweet lavender, that we're doing next week. So our sunflower is all shaded. We're going to move over to our butterfly. I'm going to make sure this is dry because it's me. So I'm going to shade our butterfly. All of these outside edges on each segment get shaded separately. So, and you're doing it with the same color. So you're going to allow that color to walk in a little bit. Just like that. So a little float of that orange right at the end of each of those segments, just like that. So that float should come about halfway up that segment. So half of it's going to have that orange, and then the other half is going to be that yellow. Just like that. I love that tone. I just think it's so, so pretty. Having that bright orange over top of that soft, delicate yellow, it's just going to make these butterflies so, so pretty. Like I said, walk it till it's about halfway up that segment. Just so pretty to have that bright orange with that pale yellow. Easy peasy. So far, so good. Not a difficult piece to paint. There's a lot of different layers to it, but it's not hard to paint. Basic techniques. And the results are so pretty. So there we go. We've got our float in our sunflowers and in our butterflies. Now, if you want to make them even brighter, you can come back in with, if you want, say you want the butterfly to be a bit more vibrant, don't be afraid to come in with a second coat. If you don't feel that it's giving you the vibrancy that you want, if you really want a dramatic butterfly, don't be afraid. Go back in and put another float of that warm sunset in. It's just going to get a little bolder, a little brighter. And it does no harm whatsoever. So anytime you want the color to really pop, nice thin layer over top of it will work every time. Now, one of my favorite things about doing sunflowers, and particularly about doing this, we want to see some real bright saturation. We want to see some really bold color. And it's hard to get bold color when you're working with a very muted color like this baby duck. One of my favorite yellows is this one, saffron. Very transparent color. Has oodles of heat, oodles of energy. And this is a great way to brighten something without actually painting it a solid color. So I've got a round brush, a little bit of Jo Sonja's, and I'm going to pick up a little bit of that thinned saffron. And I want you to watch this butterfly. You're going to put a thin coat of that saffron over everything. And look what happens to that yellow. Look how vibrant it gets. So wherever you've put that sunny day and that baby duck, put a wash of heavily thinned saffron over top of it. The color just jumps. The orange becomes more vibrant. The yellow becomes more saturated. And you can just slap it on. You don't have to worry about, neatness doesn't count with this. We're just putting a glaze of color over top of all of this. And it just makes look at the difference between that sunflower and that butterfly. That little glaze of transparent color over top just makes everything jump. We're going to do the same thing to the sunflower, which is one of the reasons I don't really worry too much about, all of these little open spaces in these baubles, because we're going to put a layer of this saffron yellow over top of everything. And look at that. That sunflower just instantly becomes bold and bright. And the oranges become even more fiery. So it's just a great color. Great way to just make colors pop. Especially oranges and yellows. You put saffron over top of it and it just becomes this yummy, high energy, very hot yellow. It's great. And brings everything to life very nicely. Saffron yellow. Beautiful color. And it's just a wash. You're not putting on a heavy base coat. You're just putting a wash of color over it. And it makes that warm sunset come to life. Just becomes so vibrant, very fiery. It's so pretty. Love it. I love saffron yellow. So we're going to dry this real quick. From this point on, things move fairly quickly. So we're going to put a nice little shadow in. I love the saturation of this. I just think it's so gorgeous. Just make sure everything is nice and dry. So we're going to use that 3/8 angle and a little bit of heavily thinned asphaltum. Again, nothing, every time I use asphaltum, I use it sparingly. And it's just for toning. So I'm going to put a coat of heavily thinned asphaltum, just float it onto the wings. See how the color jumps? Just takes on this really nice earthy warmth. I love it. And it's that earthy warmth that we want. So I've got that nice little float of asphaltum in there. And I'm going to do the same thing to the sunflower. We're going to use that asphaltum to start developing some deeper shadows. So a nice little float of asphaltum over top of that warm sunset on those petals that are in the background. All of those little ones that are tucked in behind. Going to get a float of asphaltum. Just like that. It is heavily thinned. It's not full strength. It's just going to tone and deepen some of those colors. And it helps separate that front row from the back row. I love asphaltum for that. Just think it's such a great color. It is actually more of a yellow. It is a very deep golden yellow than it is a brown. And so it works exceptionally well with yellows, oranges, and reds. It's fabulous for shading and toning those colors. And I just love how it gives everything a little more energy, a little more detail. And then I'm going to come in and tone the shadows at the very base of those petals. Just those shadows, just a little float, heavily thinned, just to deepen those shadows a little bit, that little tone at the base of the petal. We're going to deepen those colors. Just a little. There we go. And again, these sunflowers, they sort of have an extended ugly stage. Here we go. So look, those colors just got warmer and warmer. Beautimous. So I'll make sure this is good and dry. And we're going to finish our butterfly. Make sure everything is good and dry. So the liner that I'm using is this one. This one is a 5/0 extra long detail liner. It's a Dynasty Micron. These are my favorite liners. I use these ones all the time. I like that they hold a fair amount of paint. I like that they are a little bit longer. It gives you much more control over the liner brush. And I love this barrel handle. It's a very comfortable brush to use, especially if you're painting for long periods of time. So this is the brush that I use to do all of those little details in the wings. And I'm going to thin out with a little bit of Joe Sonia's or water. You can use either one. I'm going to thin out some lamp black. And I'm going to use this to do all of those little border details on the wings. So wherever anything is separated on this butterfly's wings, we're going to use that thinned lamp black. Just like that. You will find that these brushes, these Micron, especially an extra long detail liner, you have so much control over it. It's almost like working with a pencil. So there is, see, nice clean lines to separate everything. Doesn't have to be heavy line. There's a misconception that it has to be such a heavy line to detail around these things. It really doesn't. So just follow the general shape of it, like so. All these little details in here are what make the difference. And having a good liner to do them with is very important. All of the liners I use are Micron. I just find that they're exceptional. They hold more paint than you anticipate. Historically, liner brushes don't hold a lot of paint, but these ones do. Having that extra long bristle just makes a world of difference. So, just going to finish off the edge. I love all the details in this. I just think that butterflies are fun to paint because of that. They have all of these fun little details in the wings. And having a good liner brush to do them with makes your life so much simpler. Didn't even touch the palette, still managed to get paint on myself. Oh well. There we go. Makes for such a pretty butterfly. Here we go. Almost finished with this one. That little bit of black on there makes a world of difference. Just gives everything a really nice texture. And we can finish this off with my gel pen. I love working with my gel pen. It just makes all those little teeny tiny fine, ultra fine details so much simpler. Here we go. So once you've got all of those little lines in, then comes this important one, is working this border. So we want to get a nice narrow border. And the tip of the edge of the wings, this is all done in black. So instead of trying to create a perfectly uniform black area or work around all of those little white spots, I paint the whole thing black and put the white spots in afterwards. It just makes things so much simpler. So I'm going to paint all of this black. All of these little decorative areas back here are going to be black because that outside edge is going to be white. And you can do that border with either a white gel pen or paint pen. I'm going to use a liner because I want it a little heavier. And I really like having, these black details. I like them nice and clean. So that's another reason that I have a tendency to gravitate towards these liners because they just make such a nice job of everything. And I want to make sure, there we go. All right, so I'm going to grab my rigger. I'm going to rinse out my liner here. And make sure it's well rinsed. There. I'm going to use my rigger to paint in the rest of the black because we have the body as well. So I'm going to paint the body of our butterfly with lamp black. Nice and clean. Just want to make sure everything is well painted. Got on myself now. So cruising right along. So we're going to base coat, base coat, base coat. All of this area here is black. We're going to put in the white details afterwards. Easy peasy. And this is also where if I think the border is too wide, I can make the black portion a little wider. So if I feel that the border edge is a little too thick, I can just fill in some of that space with the black paint. And it'll make the painting work a little bit better. So I'm going to widen this black area just a little. I can always come in and make it white, so I'm not too worried about that. I just felt my border was a little too big, a little too thick. So base coat this with black. We're going to come in and put in all the white dots anyhow, so instead of trying to work around them, we just base coat everything black. There we go. Oof. So pretty. And it's so vibrant. I love that contrast. Getting that black with all of that brilliant orange and yellow. I just love the contrast of it. It's so pretty. So we're going to come in nice and tight in here so that we have clean edges up against that sunflower. You just take a little more care in these areas so that things look the way they're supposed to look and that it's nice and clean. There's nothing worse than having things all over the place and it looks rough and rustic and not very pretty. So take your time putting in all of this black so that everything lines up the way it's supposed to, so that, it's just pretty. There we are. Taking your time here will save you heartache in the end. Just making sure that everything is nice and clean and accurate, I think, is the word I'm looking for. I like things to look accurate. Mm-hmm. And then we can use a brush, or I'm going to grab my gel pen to do that border. I think it'd just be simpler. We're going to use paint to do all of the other little details. But like I said, you can do that border, that little white trim around the butterfly. You can do that with a gel pen. You can do that with a Posca pen. Whatever you have handy that's fairly narrow. You don't want it too heavy. And if you don't have either one of those, you can absolutely use the liner brush to do it. It's not going to hurt. So I'm going to bring that black border up. Oh, I love that butterfly. So pretty. So I'm going to dry this really well. And I'm going to use a little bit of warm white to add the details to the wings. And I'm using the handle of my brush to put the eyelet and a couple of other small dots on those tails. Easy peasy. And I like using a brush for those larger dots on things just for the sake of simplicity. And you can use smaller dots and just scatter them here and there. I like this. You don't need to have a ton of them on here, but it's nice to have fairly uniform dots to make up those details on the wing. I just think it's pretty. And this is a fun spot on both wings, is this little dip down here. And as I said, you don't have to make them perfectly symmetrical. You know, you can scatter them. They can be large, they can be small. I like to have a variety of sizes. I just find that that works better. And it makes for a very pretty butterfly. So, and I like the consistency. I think that's what it does for me, is I like seeing that they're actually dots and not, you know, rectangles or what have you. Just like the variety. There we go. So I've got white dots all over my butterfly. I'm going to dry this really well because those dots are going to stay wet for a bit. And I'm going to use my gel pen. Or maybe I'm going to use a Posca pen. Let's see. I think my Posca pen might work better. What a pretty butterfly. So I'm going to try my Posca pen. And see how that works. Might not be, this one might be too thick. We'll find out. Yeah, it's a little too thick. It's a little heavier than I would like, but that's okay. It's a nice opaque white. It finishes nicely. I think I'll probably use the gel pen to do the finer stuff on the inside. I should have used my 7mm, 0.7mm Posca pen. It's a little finer, but this is fine. I do love my Posca pens, though. There we go. So I have a white gel pen. I'm going to use that to finish these finer lines in here and in here. that worked well. I'm a big fan um, of using pens mixed in with your painting. Posca pens are fabulous, but I do like my gel pens for those ultra fine details. I think I should have used a smaller one, but it works. It did the job. There we go. It's just fine. Stands out really nicely on that background. I love that drop shadow. It just looks so nice. So we have a couple of little things, little details to take care of on our butterfly. One of which is the antenna. I'm using just a little stroke of black paint on my 5/0 liner. That worked really nicely. I'm going to dry this just to be on the safe side. And then I'm going to put a highlight on the body of our butterfly. I'm going to use my small angled shader for that, just to make sure everything is dry here. I'm using a very small amount of warm white, and I'm blending it out well. I'm not using this full strength. And I'm going to put a highlight down the left side of the body, sort of a U shape or a fishhook shape, I guess, like a J on the top segment, and then I'm going to repeat that on the bottom segment. And a couple little, just a dab of a highlight on the eyes, like so. And that's it for our butterfly. So I'm going to rinse out my brush. We need to put a shadow to separate, just set that butterfly back a little bit. I'm going to use a little float of asphaltum right here, just to set that back just a little. So, there we go. So now our butterfly is set back just a little bit from the sunflower. And this is where I'm going to work the center of this first because we've got a few little details to put on. I'm going to grab my deer foot. If it's, yep, okay, so I've got a deer foot. We're going to take a little bit of asphaltum on the deer foot, and we're going to stipple like so. And I'm going to take a little bit of margarita. I know, sounds like a really weird color to put with asphaltum. So I have both colors, asphaltum and margarita on here. And I'm going to stipple very lightly the upper left side of the outer ring, like so. And then along that inner ring. This is why I didn't paint it solid. I can see the circle inside. So there's our outer highlight and an inner highlight. So it creates sort of a cup in the center of the flower. And then I'm going to cape that dirty brush, and I'm going to stipple a highlight in the center of that little circle in the middle. So lightest value on the outer left, lightest value on the inner left, and it creates that little bowl effect. And then you just add a little highlight in the center. And it's margarita with the dirty brush loaded with asphaltum. So you get this instant shadow. Super easy, right? Now comes the fun part. We're going to shade this. We're going to make that a little bit deeper. I'm going to take a little bit of lamp black, just a little. You don't need much. Blend it out well on the brush. And you're going to put a little float in here and a float there. It's heavily thinned. It's not a solid black float, but it just darkens that area nicely, like so. So now we've got even more dimension. So we used baby duck for the base color for these leaves. We're going to use it again on our liner. And I'm going to mix baby duck with a little bit of warm white, just a touch. We don't want to make it super light. We just want to change it a little. So it's going to make it a little bit lighter than its original color, just a little. And then we're going to do this. See where that cup is, that space that we put? On that space, I'm going to put a stroke of that mixture, and then I'm going to follow the edge of the leaf, petal, sorry. And this is going to enhance that look that we were going for, that bowl, so to speak. And then the two lines are going to meet. It's going to give you a nice sharp point on the tip of your petal. And all of these inner petals get that same treatment. And this is also what covers up that little gap. Remember the space that we had to separate all those petals? That also covers up that gap. There we go. So I'm just going to continue around the edges of my petals with this fine line. You can add a little curl to the end if you like. You can make it a point. But this helps define these petals really nicely. It gives the sunflower a lot more depth and shape because it differentiates them from the ones in behind. Here we go. Just like that. So I continue until I have all of the petals done. So all of the forward petals get that little treatment there. And the ones in the back are just going to get just the point, like so. You don't need to put that little roll in. So, oops. It does give the petals some nice definition. It cleans up a bunch of little wobbles and bobbles that perhaps you don't like. If you want to hide a little boo-boo or something, this is the time to do it. You can do it with all of these little fine lines that go in. But this actually overall just softens the look of these petals considerably. They stop looking so rigid and stiff, and they suddenly become very soft and delicate, almost dainty. So you can add some fun little details, little curlicues at the end if you want to. If you want the really sharp point, it gives them really nice detail and definition. I like the character that it gives them. And it's a great time to add a little turnover if you want to. If you want to see a little flip over in the petals, you can do it now. And it'll hide any little oddities and whatnot in the finish. We're going to do something similar to the leaves using that margarita. Little bit of white added to it just to give it a little more opacity. And thin it out well so that you've got control over it. And I like the irregular, because we've got a serrated edge on these leaves, I like to give it little curly cues or little, a little definition. I don't worry about getting it perfect. It doesn't even matter if it's right on the edge. If it goes off the edge slightly, that's okay. And then you're going to use that same color to connect those little leaves and do those little curly cues, any little vines and tendrils get used. I do them with this color. And the little leaf gets the same treatment. And take a little of that to brighten the highlight on the stem. If you need a brighter little punch in there, now's the time. So now to finish off the center of this, we're going to use my black gel pen. That's not the right one. I'm missing my black gel pen. So the black gel pens that I use are the same. They are a Uniball Signal, but they're a 0.38, much like the red one that I use. Just like this. I love these Uniball Signals. And we're going to add a little detail to the leaves, and it's along little hash marks, like so. Very fine. And I usually put, one long one and then 3 or 4 little short ones on either side of it. It's just for texture, and it's fine and quick, and don't overthink it. I love my gel pen. I like these little minute details, these little fine incidental things. I think that they just make things look so much better. Super easy. Just like so. And then when you're finished the center of the sunflower, you're going to come over to the butterfly. And I pull a few fine lines onto the color from the edge of that black border onto the orange. Just a few little fine lines. They can be short, they can be long, but just a few. I do that on all of them. I just like it, creates a fun little texture, just gives the butterfly a nice finished look. And I do it on both sides. You could do it with a liner brush, but honestly with the gel pen it's so much simpler. And it just creates a little bit of texture on the wing of these butterflies. Easy peasy. So once you have that little bit of texture in there, we're going to finish off the center of this sunflower, and it's done with the rigger brush. And it's just a series of little dip dots, really, except we're using a little bit of asphaltum, and we're using a little bit of margarita, and it's a dirty brush. So we're picking up a little bit of margarita and a little bit of asphaltum, and this is going to be our highlight color. So it's just a series of little dots, just to create texture on the highlight side of our sunflower. And each time you do it, you're going to pick up a little bit more margarita, a little less asphaltum. And don't forget to bring some of those little dip dots out over the edges and onto the petals. And you're going to use that same color mixture in the center on the left side. Now, when I do this, I think of it as being split in half. So half of it's going to get the brighter color, the other half is going to get the darker color. So little asphaltum, little bit of margarita, little asphaltum, little margarita. I like the mixture. It just gives a nice highlight without getting too heavy-handed. And then again with the asphaltum, that's your shading color. So we're going to bring a little asphaltum in on that shaded side. Pick up a little bit of margarita for the highlight side. So those colors are all going to meld a little bit. So they're not going to be super bright. It's going to have a nice texture to it. And then we're going to use asphaltum and pick up a little bit of lamp black. So here is our real shading. So lamp black. Don't forget, bring it out a little onto the leaves, just past that edge, basically. Pick up a little asphaltum. And when those two colors meld, they just give off a dark tone, but it's a warm one. We don't lose the black, we just get a warmer tone. So there we go. We've got a nice little shadow going in there. And as I said, it's just stippled. It's little clusters of dots. And they're wet and they kind of blend in with each other a little bit. And then we'll pick up a little more of that margarita because I kind of lost my shadow, my highlight. And I'm going to brighten it a little bit, just bring a little more margarita into it. It was getting a little muddy. There we go. So there is our highlight on our center. I'm going to dry that real quick. Now, at any time, if you want to come in and deepen shadows, you can do that. You can brighten highlights if you want to. You can adjust from this point. But for right now, we're going to come down here and handle this lettering. Now, the word country is going to be just in black. I'm going to use my rigger and lamp black. I'm going to thin it out a little bit so that it runs off the brush smoothly. And again, we're going to treat this as if it was any other shape, not as if it's necessarily lettering. And because we're working with a thinned paint, it just makes things a little bit easier. And because we did the shadow first, it's going to take a really nice, it's going to look nice and crisp because we're not going to have any colors overlapping the base color. We're going to have nice clean edges. Nice bold lettering. I like this font. It's just a really neat one. Western Playbill is the name of that font. Works really nicely. Black lettering. Simple, simple, simple. Easy peasy. So once we have this, the word country done, the rest is actually going to be really simple because it's all done with a gel pen and a Posca pen. And it goes pretty quick. So we are just about finished with this piece. I love this. I just think that this country style farmhouse, it's sort of a contemporary country style, which really appeals to me. I like the modern color palette. Even though it has some nice rustic elements, it doesn't have that grungy rustic, I guess, which appeals to me too. I really, I do have a few pieces that are kind of grungy rustic, I guess. I've always really loved vintage country look, farmhouse look. Anything like that has really always appealed to me. And so old advertising art, old crate labels and things like that, enamelware, all of that, just, I love it. Have always loved that look. And so for home decor, the only downside is that I like things to look really clean. So I kind of like to have my country look to be a bit more contemporary, I guess. More contemporary colors. And so this type of thing really appeals to me. And it's fun to do. It's not hard to do, but it's fun to do. So if you've ever wondered how come I use lettering so much in most of my design work, it's because of that. I have always had a thing for the written word. And so old advertising art, old signage, old product labeling just really appeals to me. Years ago, and I do mean years ago, a book came out. I still have a copy of it. I have painted every single piece in that book at least twice. And it is all based on old advertising art, and I just love it. And I was flipping through it the other day, and I'm having one of those moments where I can't remember a name. Susan something. And I was thinking, oh, I really should repaint that because I just loved it. One of my favorite pieces of hers was a piece called Tabasco Sauce, and I just loved everything about it. So I think at some point in time I may repaint it again. I've painted them several times, so I just love the style of it, which is why I gravitate toward this type of artwork, because I really love the lettering, the old-fashioned finishes. I just love it. So that's why I have a tendency to do it. And I have so many fun ideas coming up, so my brain won't shut off right now. So here we go. Almost done this lettering. Then I'm going to dry it. We're going to put a quick highlight on this, a very quick highlight. It doesn't have to be much. There we go. I love the fact that this lettering does not have to be absolutely perfect. As long as it's straight and level, it's all good. So here we go. Make sure this is good and dry. I love the layers in this. I think that's what appeals. I like the layers. Everything's stacked on top of each other. It's just fun. So I have a 3/8 angled shader, and I'm going to use a small amount of warm white. Don't need a lot. It's not going to be a strong float. So blend it out really well. And, oops, okay. For a second I thought I missed that I didn't have any paint in it. I did. Okay, get some more paint. There we go. So we're going to put just a simple highlight on the left side of this lettering. Simple little float down the left side. I've got my paints a little strong, but that's all right. So just come in from the edge, just a scooch, just a little bit, and float a little highlight on the left side of the letter. Oh my goodness, I completely messed that up. It's one of those days. I've been dropping things today, tripping over things. I'm a klutz today. And apparently I can't load a brush to save my soul. So, there. Okay, close enough. So, little highlight down the left side. Terrible float, but it'll do the trick. It's just to indicate a highlight, so I will blot it and I'll tone it down. So same for the letter T. Highlight goes in the same place all the way across. Doesn't have to be perfect. And it's not a really intense highlight. It's just a quick one, just so that it doesn't look flat. I think that's my biggest thing. I just don't like the lettering to look flat. So there we go. Okay, close enough. I'm loving it. So we're going to put a shadow on the right side of each of the letters of sunflower. And we're going to do that with a little bit of asphaltum, which is this darker color, just so that we raise this lettering a little bit off of the surface. So again, it's not a strong float, so blend it well. So right side, little float in there, right side, inside the curve, outside like that. We're going to do that to each letter. It's not perfect. It's fast and dirty. That's how I like to refer to it as. Quick and dirty. Inside the F. Inside the O, the L, I should say. Don't forget those little connectors to the lower right. Make sure all of those get it too. It does make a difference in how the letter stands out. It's sort of a dropped shadow. So there we go. I've got nice little shading around my lettering. Et voila. Okay, I'm happy with that. So, good nice little shadow. That's going to make our lettering stand up really nicely. And I'm going to use my Posca pen. Make sure that this is well shaken. And test it. Yep, I've got paint. And then it's just tracing the lettering. And just making sure that you cover the line and that you're right up against that shadow. That's the only thing that matters here. And I absolutely love these pens. So you're going to go right over top of that leaf. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. I love Posca pens for this. Look at that. So simple. So I'm going to dry this real quick. I've only got a couple of steps left for this one. So make sure everything is dry. Love how this looks. Such a fun piece to paint. So we've got all of our shadows in place, all of our drop shadows around our butterfly, the shadows under our lettering, the drop shadow on the word country. We have all of our details in place, all of the curlicues and whatnot on the leaves and the petals. all of the dip dots and highlights on our butterfly. So make sure our paint pen is nice and dry. And we're going to add a tiny shadow to the word sunflower, just to make it pop off of there. And we're going to do that with a black gel pen in the same place that we did the shadows, right on the edge of the white. You're going to put a fine line of the black. Like so. That little bit of black just makes the lettering stand up a little bit more. So it seems like a small detail, but look at the difference. It kind of disappears in here because it's on a lighter background, but watch this. That little fine line of black makes your lettering pop. It just defines it a little bit. It's not as if we've put a ton of color on there, but that little tiny line makes all the difference in the world. So we'll finish off this little detail just like that. I just love how that tiny line really makes this lettering stand up really well. And it's such a fun little detail to put in. And it's just in that tight little edge. So it's very fine, but look at how that lettering pops off of there. It just crisps it up. Gives it a really nice definition without being really heavy-handed. I love it. I love that finish. And it works so well on white. Almost finished. We've got one more little thing to do. There we go. Love it. Love it. So, all of those fun little details are in. One last thing that I love to do for almost anything, and I think you know what it is, I'm going to spatter this with a little bit of lamp black. Ordinarily, I don't use a dark color. I will use a little asphaltum or a little bit of white. But this one just cries out for a little bit of black. I heavily thinned it so I get a fairly loose spatter, and I'm controlled. I don't want to have it everywhere, so I'm tucking it into a few corners, just like that. I love spatter, especially on country themed things. I just think it adds a little extra texture to whatever you're painting. I'm going to dry this real quick. Now, to finish this, I will take one of my Factus black erasers or my Tombow black eraser and remove all of the graphite lines once everything is completely dry. Usually like to let it sit overnight. Once it's completely dry, seal it with 1 or 2 light coats of Decor matte spray before you varnish. Let it dry really well, and then you can varnish as usual. Because we're using so many different mediums in this, we are using a glazing medium, we're using an inked gel pen, a couple of them, and then we're using a paint pen along with acrylic paints. You never know how things are going to react, so I like to make sure that everything is sealed nice and tight before I varnish, and then I never have to worry about whether or not my pen is going to run because of the varnish. So this is just a simple way of ensuring that everything works well. The other thing I like to do is to finish my edges. I usually paint these black to match that rolled edge that we put on. So I like a nice black border on them. So this is what I do. I finish off the edges in black. And again, 2 to 3 light coats Decor matte spray, and you're finished. Fun and easy peasy paint piece to paint. So I hope you enjoyed painting this one. I really had a lot of fun with it, and I really love doing the one with the bumblebee as well. So that one will be coming up in a future class. Next Saturday, we're going to be painting Sweet Lavender, and the pattern is already available on the website. I love this piece, but you know, it has bumblebees and it has lavender in it, so you know I'm going to love it. So please join us. We have some wonderful giveaways for next Saturday, courtesy of Tombow and Dynasty Brush, and of course some stuff from us as well. So I look forward to seeing all of you next Saturday. Thank you for joining me. Mwah. Love you. Stay safe.